Good morning, pre-service teachers. Today I will be sharing with you my findings under the topic of teaching strategies to enhance students' critical thinking skills through English literacy. There has been a wealth of academic literature produced which focuses on the perspectives of primary school teachers in Australia and worldwide, communicating their experiences in discovering the successes and failures to implement effective strategies for building their students' critical thinking. While this research has been conducted, the literature suggests that currently there is a great deal of disunity among academics and teachers regarding how critical thinking should be taught. In 2021, a research paper asserted that research into the specific teaching strategies that would promote pupils' core critical thinking skills across the whole school in primary education remains scarce. This means that in current teaching practice, it is up to individual teachers to devise their own personal plans for ensuring that critical thinking is adequately taught in their classroom. Despite this, academics agree that critical thinking is the most important skill for students of the 21st century. For this reason, I will also be sharing with you today the action plan that I have devised for my own teaching practice, which is informed by the current best-known strategies for teaching critical thinking, which will be one of the top priorities of my teaching career. So now we will go through the background information necessary to understand my action plan. This plan is to be implemented into the context of an urban primary school, which is likely to be comprised of a multicultural cohort, with the majority of students being Australian, but each class containing at least one student from a migrant background, as this is the norm in my city. The skills within my action plan will be taught during English literacy lessons. So firstly, we will consider the different definitions of critical thinking as it is most widely understood across the literature. Second, we will consult the Australian curriculum model. Thirdly, we'll identify the relevant Australian professional standards for teachers. Fourthly, we will discover the perspectives of major players in this space, and finally, we will recognise the common themes that emerge from the literature. So first, definitions. The most basic definition is the process of purposeful self-regulatory judgment, which was written by Fassioni in the 1990s, who we will learn more about in the major players section. A more updated definition, which is widely recognised due to its use by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, is a process that involves asking appropriate questions, gathering and creatively sorting through relevant information, relating new information to existing knowledge, re-examining beliefs and assumptions, reasoning logistically, and drawing reliable and trustworthy conclusions. As for the actual skills involved, we will discuss these in the common themes section. So next we will look at the Australian curriculum model. This model is in place to communicate the key ideas of critical and creative thinking to be taught in Australian schools, which is comprised of 4 interrelated elements or capabilities. These elements are inquiring, identifying, exploring, and organising information and ideas, generating ideas, possibilities, and actions, reflecting on thinking and processes, and analysing, synthesising, and evaluating reasoning and procedures. So my action plan must align with all 4 of these capabilities. In my research, I found that all 4 of these elements are common themes, but there can be additional abilities or steps in the process. Teaching critical thinking through English literacy is situated most accurately within 2 of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, or APSTs. The first is APST 3.3. At the graduate level, this is to include a range of teaching strategies. And the second is APST 2.5, which at the graduate level is to know and understand literacy and numeracy teaching strategies and their applications in teaching areas. These standards guide the process of implementing an action plan for teaching critical thinking in my future classroom. Next, we must consider the major players in this space of academic literature. Perhaps the person with the most experience focusing on critical thinking in a school context is Peter Fassioni, whose work has spanned from the 90s into recent years. Fassioni's work promotes that teaching critical thinking relies upon the skills of interpretation, analysis, inference, evaluation, explanation, and self-regulation. These can all be utilised when teaching English literacy. For this reason, I will be implementing these 6 skills into my action plan. Another major player in this area is Benjamin Bloom, the creator of Bloom's taxonomy, which is used and referenced in a vast array of education-based academic literature since its publication in the 1950s. Many academics consider the 3 highest categories of Bloom's hierarchy of learning-related domains to be representative of critical thinking. A wide range of literature surrounding critical thinking leads to the conclusion that there are 3 schools of thought that have emerged in relation to this concept. These 3 approaches are the philosophical approach, which is the oldest approach and began with such ideas as Socrates introducing doubt in his students' minds to push their learning and thus urging them towards how they should think. This approach is the most estranged from my context of teaching English literacy, so my research did not delve too deeply into it. The second is the psychological approach, which is very different to the first approach in that it focuses on how people do think and is more interested in producing lists of skills and processes necessary to develop as a critically thinking individual. This approach has been partly beneficial to inform my action plan, as such lists make up for the shortcomings of the third approach, which is the educational approach. This is obviously the key approach for my research, as it is the most relevant to the context of teaching English literacy. The educational approach has emerged from interviews and empirical compilations of the experiences of classroom teachers, as I referred to earlier. This is the most critical school of thought for informing my action plan. Despite the differences of these 3 approaches, the literature suggests that they all agree that critical thinking encompasses problem solving, analysis of evidence, reason-based deduction, judgment, and evaluation. Another theme that emerges from the literature suggests that critical thinking is comprised of 2 elements, skills and dispositions. The skills element has evidently been more thoroughly researched than the dispositions element. The skills element is obviously more relevant to my research topic and my teaching practice, so my research steered towards information pertaining to this element. Now that we have the 5 points of background knowledge, I will explain to you the steps of my literature-informed action plan. There are 5 steps to this plan, including strategies, resourcing, key supports, timeframes, and evaluation. First, let's look at the different strategies I can use to teach in accordance with both of my key APSTs. As I teach English literacy, I will be implementing the most successful strategies used by teachers that I have discovered in my research. Perhaps the most widely agreed upon strategy for advancing students' critical thinking skills is the strategy of debating. Debating is usually an extracurricular activity in schools, but it can be adapted for the classroom with a similar activity that the literature calls the creative controversy model. This model provides excellent opportunities to engage all of the critical thinking skills within the same activity. It starts with students being put into groups of 4 and the 2 pairs taking opposite positions on an issue. Here, their skills in interpretation and problem solving are engaged. Then they build a case for their position before comparing their case with the other pairs in the group who share their position. In the class who share their position, which invites comparison of ideas and compiling justifications. Here, they build their skills in analysis and inference. Next, the pairs of opponents challenge each other with their cases, which builds their skills in evaluation and explanation. Next, the pairs switch perspectives, aiming to argue the opposite case to what they started with, which challenges their skills in self-regulation and reasoning. The activity ends with the teams reaching a consensus on which case they actually believe to be true based on all of the evidence presented. This activity encompasses all of the capabilities required by the Australian curriculum model in a succinct, engaging timeframe, and is thus a key strategy for my action plan. The literature also suggests that sharing ideas in a discussion space greatly encourages such skills as interpretation and analysis, and activities that require students to swap their work and gain feedback from their peers can help with their evaluation and explanation skills. Similarly, cooperation activities are a vital strategy for students to build their critical thinking skills. I can aim to have a cooperation activity such as think, pair, share in every